From X Factor finalist and Instagram influencer to accused murderer, prosecutors across the pond say a mega famous Instagram model is responsible for the death of another influencer, allegedly mowing her down in a Mercedes outside a posh London nightclub as rumors swirl about an ongoing feud. This is Scandal, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Gillespie. A London-based Instagrammer is now behind bars, facing the most serious charge there is after allegedly running down a fellow influencer with her car and leaving her for dead. This comes after months of a reported feud between the pair, starting with one unfollowing the other, a potential romantic rival, and ultimately what English prosecutors are now calling murder. Today's scandal takes us across the pond to London, England. That's where this tragic event happened and where the two main players lived as well. So let's start with that, introducing everyone who was involved. First, there's 32-year-old Claudia Zakrzewska. Originally, she's from Poland, but Claudia made her mark on the world by showing off her luxurious lifestyle in England. She was a bona fide influencer, boasting 275,000 followers on Instagram alone. She was known for her beautiful photos, showing high-end clothes, fun and exciting trips, and just an overall enviable lifestyle. Then there's 29-year-old Gabrielle Carrington, known online as Riel UK. Gabrielle rose to fame back in 2013 when she appeared on the British show The X Factor. Back then, Gabrielle was part of a girl group called Miss Dynamics. Since then, though, she's continued to live her life in the spotlight in a way pretty similar to that of Claudia. She too posts to Instagram showing off amazing outfits, fun vacations, and a behind-the-curtain look at high-end parties. For her part, Gabrielle's got a whopping 368,000 followers on Instagram. Needless to say, both of these women are major influencers. They both have very large followings and have leveraged their lifestyles into full-on careers. And that's where the drama allegedly begins. According to the influencer Lala, there's been some tension brewing from behind the scene for months. It seems to start with something very small. Claudia reportedly unfollowing Gabrielle on Instagram, but after that, it allegedly only got worse. There are multiple rumors circulating online, and let me stress this, they are just rumors. They have not been officially confirmed, but some sources on Twitter or X say they were fighting over a man. Others speculate they had a business deal that fell through, causing the drama to perpetuate. Now, it's unclear what exactly happened in their personal lives leading up to this incident, but we know things went from bad to worse on April 19th. Both Gabrielle and Claudia were in the Soho neighborhood of London visiting a nightclub called Inca. According to prosecutors, quote, further checks of CCTV show that Ms. Carrington, meaning Gabrielle, had arrived in Argyle Street in her car, which was nearby to the Inca nightclub. During this time, she seemed to have an altercation with a male as she exited her car. Now, prosecutors say Gabrielle got into this altercation. That continued after she got out of her car, a black Mercedes. Club security tried to break it all up, but then Gabrielle got back into the driver's seat. Prosecutors would later say in open court, quote, during this maneuver, the vehicle has struck Ms. Zakrzewska, who was positioned to the front side of the vehicle, and she was dragged forwards and dropped between the vehicle and a metal bike rack. So again, according to prosecutors, Gabrielle drug Claudia with her vehicle, crashing Claudia's body into a metal bike rack. As the vehicle kept moving forward, it fully took her underneath the vehicle and at the same time had struck a security member of staff, Anush Shaishush, who was on the pavement. According to the Metropolitan Police, the security guard had, quote, life-changing injuries, and another woman named Letitia Armstrong was also injured in the crash. Police were called at about 4:30 a.m. that day and arrived to the scene by about 5. According to the Manchester Evening News, prosecutors said the scene can only be described as lots of people shouting. It could be described as melee, so to speak. But the worst of all was for Claudia. She was rushed to the hospital and fell into a coma. Shortly thereafter, Gabrielle was arrested. Tests showed she had 61 micrograms of alcohol per 100 milliliters of breath. I looked it up because in America, we're more used to blood alcohol content or BAC. That means Gabrielle blew between a 0.13 and a 0.14, nearly twice the legal limit of 0.08. Now, at the time, Gabrielle was charged with grievous bodily harm with intent, actual bodily harm, dangerous driving, drink driving, what it's called over there, and attempted murder. She appeared in Westminster Magistrates Court on April 21st and was remanded into custody. She didn't enter a plea, but according to the Manchester Evening News, she made a heart symbol with her hands towards her family and friends who were sitting in the courtroom. Now, those initial charges for Gabrielle are very serious, but they have now been bumped up to the most severe charge a person can face: murder, after Claudia died on April 25th. The Metropolitan Police released a statement after her death, reading in part, quote, "We would like to express our deepest sympathies to Claudia's family and friends in light of this tragic update. Our thoughts are also with everyone impacted by this incident. We recognize that this case has generated significant interest and discussion on social media. However, we would urge the public to refrain from further speculation. We also ask that people do not share graphic footage out of respect for Claudia's loved ones and for those who have been injured. The circulation of such material could also undermine our ongoing criminal investigation and potentially prejudice future court proceedings." In a world where everything is curated for social media, these two influencers found out the hard way that you can't delete a real-life tragedy once the scrolling stops. And now to dive even deeper into this case, for that, we're going to bring on today's guest. It's international law attorney and friend of Scandal, David Tafuri. David, great to see you. Thanks for coming on. And I guess let's start with this question. Now our defendant, she originally faced attempted murder. Now she's facing the charge of murder. I mean, do you think it's justified to bump up that charge?
Yes, I do. It's because the victim passed away. And so they initially charged attempted murder while she was still alive, being treated. Unfortunately, the treatment didn't work. She wasn't able to be saved. And so now it's murder, and murder requires intent, mens rea, and it looks like that might be possible that they can prove that, but that's going to be the hurdle for the prosecution to be successful in getting a conviction on the murder charge.
Yeah, to your point, it makes sense to me that they would update or rather bump up the charge to murder now that the victim has unfortunately passed away in this case. Just a devastating tragedy all around. But there is a pretty big difference between a charge of attempted murder, still really severe, but attempted murder is not as severe as murder because somebody's life ended here. So I know what it's like a bit here in the States, but is it similar there across the pond, the differences between those two charges?
Sure, it is. I mean, the sentence is going to be a lot heavier as a result of this now being bumped up to a murder charge. And so for sure, because it's a very serious charge, this will be a jury trial in Crown Court in the UK. I believe it's going to be at the Old Bailey in London. And the jury will have to weigh the evidence to decide whether they find that she was guilty.
Yeah, you mentioned Old Bailey, and I had heard that before. When I was researching this, it kind of triggered my memory. I want to say Kevin Spacey was seen there. It's kind of like a big deal court. And I know it's different here where it's like based on jurisdictions. This happened in London. But can you explain anything to me about that court that I might not already know?
Well, this is the highest kind of trial court. So if this were a lesser offense, if this were akin to a misdemeanor, then she could be tried in a magistrate's court and perhaps also be tried without a jury. But in this case, it's going to be at the High Court, the Old Bailey, and with a jury trial.
Okay, so this is the biggest deal. I mean, the most severe charge you can face, the highest court that they have over there. So this isn't something just to be scoffed at. And I guess there's kind of a lot of factors that went into all of this. So let's break those down before we circle back to talk about murder. Now, one of the things is that there was an alleged feud or ongoing beef between these two women, because I looked at their Instagram followings. Both of them have thousands, hundreds of thousands of followers. They're, top of the top on as far as it comes to social media and being influencers. But I guess they had kind of some beef and background between each other. Is that something that prosecutors would want to kind of take a look in as they were, I guess, working toward this case going to trial?
Sure. In order to satisfy that mens rea, to show intent, either intent to kill someone or to do grievous bodily harm, they're going to want to be able to show that there was a motive. And so what occurred between these two, the fight that they were having, the arguments that they were having, will be part of the motive. And I also looked at their Instagram pages. They have a similar look to them, I think it's fair to say. So maybe they're also kind of competing for the same space. as influencers. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe there's jealousy between them, and that ended up kind of being exacerbated into what resulted in this very unfortunate incident.
Okay, so you mentioned motive. Now, I know here in the United States, it isn't required to either bring a charge or yield a conviction. Most of the time we like to have it. And I say we like to because me, as a person who works in true crime, I like to know why there's a motive. I know that jurors too, because murder is the most heinous crime. We want to know why something like that happened. Is it required over in the UK to have?
It's not required, but it's an important part of demonstrating intent. In other words, if you have a motive, the jury is more likely to find that there was intent.
And that makes sense to me because if I'm her defense attorney, I could say, okay, she got in the car. Maybe she didn't see Claudia there. You know, maybe we're going to talk about drinking and driving too, but it was just a big accident. However, if I'm a prosecutor, I'm going to say, well, let's look at, their background. Let's look at their text. Let's look at their feuding that they had ongoing. So I do kind of agree that this motive is kind of important, but the premeditation of it all, is it the same here as it is over in the UK as far as murder and premeditation and the requirement there?
Yeah, premeditation is going to be part of the analysis because that would also show that there was intent. But I don't think you need premeditation to find have a guilty charge on murder. You just have to have that mens rea, that level of intent that you intended to either cause serious, grievous bodily harm, which is the term that the UK uses, or you intended to kill the person. But you could have developed that intent a very short time before the incident happened.
Okay, so let's talk about intent, the mens rea that you keep bringing up here, because that's what prosecutors say happened, that our defendant, Gabrielle, she had this intent, this mens rea to kill the victim. However, is her defense just going to say, like I said, it was an accident, this, a terrible tragedy shouldn't have happened? But do you think, the route that they're going to go?
Well, I don't think we have any information about what defense they are going to raise, but you can assume that would perhaps be the best defense that they have, unless there are other facts that we don't know yet. But given that there were eyewitnesses to this incident, and I believe it was also recorded on video, it's going to be hard for them to say that she wasn't the driver of the vehicle. So perhaps they're going to argue that she didn't mean actually to hit this victim and that it was an accident. And that would be probably the most likely defense, barring other facts that we do not know.
Yeah, you're right. We haven't heard anything about a defense as of now. That's all just speculation. She hasn't even entered a plea of any sort at this point, so still kind of early on. But you did mention something about CCTV or surveillance camera, and there was a court hearing when it originally was the attempted murder charge where prosecutors over in the UK kind of described everything. And the way that they talked about it, it was just so gruesome to even just read what they were saying that I guess allegedly prosecutors say Gabrielle's behind the wheel and she literally drags Claudia into a metal, where people park their bikes, a metal bike rack, drags her under the vehicle. That to me, I mean, we can talk about this with her being allegedly drunk or, under the influence over the BAC that's legal over there. But that to me it's just extra heinous of a way, a vehicle versus a human who's not in a vehicle. I mean, is that something the prosecutors would highlight?
Well, I think that's going to impact the jury and might inflame the emotions of the jury. And I assume the jury is going to get to see this video, which, as I understand and you alluded to, is very gory and detailed. And the prosecution urged people not to be forwarding that video around. But the jury is probably not going to be spared that video. And it's likely to play a part in how they look at this case. And certainly, as you mentioned, if she had a chance to stop after she initially hit the victim and she continued to drag her, that also may play into the question of whether she had intent.
You're right. There's a lot of witnesses plus this video. So let's say, she's screaming her name. I'm making this up. This is all speculation. But if she's like, F you, I want you to die, something like that, where she knows what she's doing, that's a major red flag. Again, speculation. Of course, both sides are going to have to take a look at the video, interview the witnesses that are around. But at the very least, you mentioned this, that the Metropolitan Police said, please don't share this video. It's traumatizing enough for Claudia and her family to have to live through a loved one one, 32, very young woman, beautiful, to be killed in this way. But then on top of that, if we're sharing this around, it's very hurtful to them, but also could maybe jeopardize the investigation. And that kind of leads into my next question is, she just recently died. The crash happened, a week or so ago, a little bit more, but she just recently died. So does that change the course of the investigation? Because initially she was still alive. Maybe she'll wake up from the coma. Maybe we'll be able to interview her as investigators. Now she's passed on. It kicks it into a homicide investigation, right?
Yes, absolutely. And obviously she's not going to be a witness. They're not going to be able to, take her testimony. And so that will impact the case. But as we talked about, there's a lot of other evidence. And so they may not need her testimony to find the defendant guilty.
I've talked about this a couple of times, mentioned it, but I want to ask you about it specifically. So driving under the influence here, I know it varies state to state, but it's pretty severe. I mean, drinking and driving, a lot of people die from it. It's a tragic thing that happens. And we in the United States, I know you can spend some pretty hefty time behind bars. What is it like over there in the UK if she's over the legal limit?
So it's also, a crime in the UK. I don't know exactly what the blood alcohol content limit is in London, and I don't know what evidence there is, whether they actually have evidence of what her blood alcohol content was. It does sound like they have it because she was charged with the crime of being under the influence. But this is obviously a much lesser crime than the crime, than the crime of murder, and so they will likely, continue with that charge. But they're going to be focused on getting a guilty verdict on the murder charge.
Now I'm thinking as a defense attorney, if I'm her team, I guess, and I don't know how it works over there, so you explain this to me, but I would say, okay, let's make this a vehicular manslaughter charge because, okay, if she's under the influence and they do have her blood alcohol content, I have it in the story. I don't know off the top of my head what it is there. Here in the States, it's 0.08. It's something very comparable in London. But if they say, okay, yeah, we've got her breathalyzer or her blood. Okay, she was over the limit. We can't really, defend that. Why is this not vehicular manslaughter versus murder? Is that something that her defense could even argue for bumping down the charge?
I think so. If the prosecution found that they're having trouble proving intent, then they could bump down the charge to manslaughter. And that's usually what happens when you have a case where there's a murder charge, but they aren't able to prove intent. This may be something that the defense goes after. They may embrace the fact that she was drunk, right? Because they may plead guilty to the, under the influence charge and say that this was an accident that happened when she was under the influence. That would be a much lesser punishment if she's only found guilty of driving under the influence and not found guilty of murder or manslaughter.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm kind of thinking if I'm a defense attorney, the route that I would want to go. But to your point, everything we've talked about so far, it seems that prosecutors believe that there was this mens rea, that there was this intent, and it's likely possible that they have a lot of information they haven't revealed to us in the public. We're just talking about these rumors that have swirled about, their feud or their beef, whatever it may be. Maybe prosecutors know. Maybe prosecutors have looked in their DMs. And I guess that kind of leads into my next question. We know about both of these women, one because she was a contestant on The X Factor, which is a really famous show, I guess, internationally. But additionally, they're both pretty famous influencers at this point. And I'm wondering, could any of their posts, their DMs, their lifestyle as influencers be used as court exhibits if this were to go to trial?
Absolutely. I think their posts certainly will be part of the evidence if they posted about each other. I don't know if they posted publicly about each other, but as you mentioned, their direct messages with friends or if they were communicating with each other will also be an important part of the evidence. My guess is there's a very long and evolved story here that, created this beef that, got exacerbated into this conflict that ultimately resulted in this murder charge. And so it's going to be a very interesting story to follow to get a better understanding of the motive and how do two women who are famous, who seem to have luxurious lives, end up in this situation where one is dead and one is likely going to spend a lot of time in jail.
Yeah, they both have lives that if you're just scrolling through, I find myself even doing this where I'm looking and I'm like, oh my God, I wish I had their lives. Look at their clothes, look at their vacations. This looks so amazing. And yet to have it end this way, to your point, one is 32 years old. She's now been murdered. The other, 29 years old, accused of murder. I mean, it's not where you would think it would go. And I think you're right. This case is getting a lot of attention because we're getting a look behind the curtain. What is it really like in these high-end influencer roles? And then to have this charge, I know I keep saying it, but the most severe charge you can face, because murder is just, the most unforgivable act. And again, she has not been convicted here. She hasn't even entered a plea. And that leads into my last question for you, David. What are your thoughts, your hypotheses for what's ahead? Do you think this would end in a plea? Is her defense going to try to bump it down as we suggested? If she is convicted of murder, what sort of sentence would she face? What are just your overall thoughts about the future?
Well, it sounds like, before we know more, there's just a lot of evidence. Like, it's going to be an overwhelmingly strong case for the prosecution. And so my guess is what the defense will try to do is make the defense that you said. And if that is not successful, they will try to do a plea where they plead to manslaughter, plead guilty to manslaughter in order to get a lesser sentence. That's how I would guess it's going to turn out. But again, we need to stay tuned and figure out what other facts are out there. What defenses does she possibly have? And perhaps she's going to argue there was an element of self-defense. She thought he was going to attack. She was going to be attacked. But of course, that's very flimsy because she got in her vehicle. She was already protected from her. So it'll be very interesting to see what the defense comes up with. But my guess is perhaps trying to plead to a lesser crime.
Yeah, this one, it's just tragic on all fronts too. A life lost, a person's life ruined, the decisions that were made, totally preventable. It's a very, very tragic and sad story. David Tafuri, thank you for coming on Scandal and walking us through it all.
Thank you.
Gabrielle Carrington is due back in court on May 19th, and that's where today's episode of Scandal leaves us for now. If you like what you saw and you want to see more or connect with me on social media like Instagram, you can find me at Sierra Gillespie. Thanks for watching today's episode of Scandal. As always, I'm your host, Sierra Gillespie, and I'll see you next time.